Chapter 4. The train slowed and the conductor called out the stop at Prater's Junction, just after bare fields blazed orange with the waning sun. The whistle screeched our arrival into the station. I wondered if Mama would be relieved that no strange man had tried to strike up a conversation with me, or be disappointed that I didn't get to heed her advice and freeze him with a silent stare. Not that I would have done that exactly. It might have been interesting to converse with a stranger who would walk off the train and out of my life, but the opportunity never presented itself. Black smoke streamed in through open windows. I coughed until I made it to the open air of the platform. For the first time in my life, I'd left Downingtown, home, far, far away. My lips curved upward, my feet itching to dance a jig. Instead, they jumped when the whistle screamed, and the train strained forward. A cinder landed on the skirt of my traveling suit. I brushed it away and lifted my chin, ready to meet my adventure. But where to begin? No one lingered near the empty tracks. Had anyone else disembarked? I didn't recall. The heels of my lace boots clomped loud on the flat planks. I reached the small building at the back of the platform and peered through the windows. An empty waiting room opposite an empty office. I turned to look beyond the station. In spite of the dimming day, I recognized that Prater's Junction had even less to recommend it than Downingtown. But no matter. I'd get Aunt Annabelle back on her feet, and she'd help me find a way to Dallas to Arthur. Then my life would really begin. 2 steps down, and I stood in the rutted road that crossed the train tracks. A horse whined near my ear. I dropped my suitcase and jumped back with a squeal as hooves danced behind the hitching post. An empty buggy jiggled behind the startled animal. I stretched my hand toward the velvet nose. There now, pretty boy. I stroked him until he calmed. Voices murmured in the distance. I strained to see the people talking, but the depot building obscured my view. Surely one of them owned this horse and buggy, but as the shadows lengthened, the voices fell silent, leaving only the chirp of cicadas and an occasional lowing of a farewell cattle. A bit of tiny music surrounded from one of the storefronts that lined the main street of town. Beyond that, faint squares of yellow broke into the gray of the evening. The thought of walking up to a strange front door to ask directions filled me with horror, so I decided I'd wait for someone to claim the horse and buggy. The coming night cooled in the heat of the day, and while I welcomed it, I still shriveled as I picked up my suitcase and headed back up onto the platform. My foot hit something solid. I stumbled forward, the weight of my suitcase pulling me toward the floorboards. My ankle bent sideways, and I cried out in pain. Strong hands caught my arms, held me aloft. "Woo, Nellie!" The man's hat darkened his face. "Thank you, sir." I took a step back, winching at the pain in my ankle. I lifted my sore foot until only the toe of my boot touched the ground, and tried to balance myself with dignity. "Are you injured?" The man pushed back the rim of his hat before cradling my elbow in one hand. "No, sir. I'll manage." He studied me now, seemed to realize he didn't know my face. "Welcome to Prater's Junction, miss." I raised my eyebrow and tried to look down my nose at him, but Mama's face wouldn't work on me. I burst out laughing. He joined in. "I'm Rebecca Hendrickson. And you?" "Henry Jeffries, sheriff." He doffed his hat and tipped his head. "The sheriff? Quite a welcoming committee, I do declare." Did I spy a blush creep over his face? "I wonder if you could help me find my mother's sister, Annabelle Williams." "Annabelle Williams. I've come to take care of her for a while. His expression softened a bit, but if from the fading light or from something else, I couldn't make it out. I'll take you to her. Do you have any other luggage? He glanced over his shoulder before lifting my suitcase and heading towards the road. No, that's that. No, just that. I tried to follow, but as I took a step, dull pain throbbing in my ankle, I let out a tiny yelp. Forgive me. The sheriff came back and helped me wobble down the steps. Wait here. He rushed past the horse and buggy and disappeared behind a building in the distance. An engine sputtered to life, out of sight. Then an old model automobile chugged toward the platform. Sheriff Jeffries jumped out, stowed my suitcase in the back, and held the door open as I climbed into the car. We lurched forward into the twilight, one of my hands clutching my bag, the other holding my hat on my head. Thin beams of light moved before us on the road. I'd ridden with Barney Graves in his Model T once. With other passengers, of course. What would Mama think of me riding alone with a man she didn't know? On second thought, maybe I wouldn't tell her about this. The jolting settled some. I removed my hand from my hat and glanced sideways at my companion. A well-made suit, though Mama was stiff at its rumpled state. Large, smooth hands gripping the steering wheel, his gaze pinned to the road. We hit a rut. I bounced from my seat, the roof above me crushing the crown of my hat. I must have let out a whoop because Sheriff Jeffries slowed the car. Are you all right? Perfectly. My cheeks hurt from grinning. The car gained speed again. I couldn't see the dust collecting on my white blouse, but I knew it was. I'd have to brush it clean at my aunt's house. For now, I wanted to enjoy the ride. Do you know my aunt very well? I asked. Sheriff Jeffries hesitated. Fairly well. Something in his voice pricked my interest. What's she like? He turned his head for a moment, his eyebrows slanting toward his nose. Don't you know her? I've met her, but she and my mother don't. How did I say it without speaking ill of my mother or her sister? He whistled long and low, wondered why I'd never heard of you before. It comforted me to know Aunt Annabelle hadn't told our business about town. I didn't want anyone to know about the argument I'd heard between Mama and her sister during Annabelle's second and final visit to our home. I don't see why you won't just move back here, Annabelle, Mama had schooled as if Annabelle were no more than my own 11 years. Mama thought I was helping Daddy and Will in the south field, but I'd came back for lemonade, heard the voices, and slipped beneath the porch. I lay in the cool dirt listening. I've lived on my own for over 10 years now, Margaret. I like it. I like not having anyone to tell me what to do. Except your employers, of course. I mean, with my life, I get to make my own decisions. They just direct my duties within their household. But a woman living alone is unseemly. Why? I'm a widow, Margaret. How can you find fault with me for that? If you hadn't run away with that boy, 16 was far too young. I loved him. I still do. Aunt Annabelle's voice sounded sad. She went away again without saying hello or goodbye, and Mama never mentioned the visit ever. Had Aunt Annabelle loved her husband the way I loved Arthur? I hope so. In fact, excuse me. In fact, I was counting on it. I squinted into the darkness, and I spoke to the sheriff. Has Aunt Annabelle been feeling poorly for long? No. He drew out a word, almost as if he thought I should know the answer to my own question. Then he slid another look my way. Is she confined to bed? I watched his eyes narrow as if he were trying to see something far away. I peered through the windscreen. All I saw was road. Seen any of the influenza up your way? I hadn't heard of any particular outbreak of flu around our town, but I hadn't paid much attention to the ongoings in anyone's life but my own lately. Still, relief swept through me. I'd had the flu before. A week or so in bed, and Aunt Ada Bell would be up and around again, wouldn't she? After that, I could figure out a way to get to Arthur. Silence hung between us, awkward as a crooked picture. Is that what she has? I asked. Influenza? Yes, but... His lips puckered shut. But what? The car slowed. A two-story farmhouse loomed against the darkening horizon. Is that her house? Yes. A long, unsure bird. That same uneasy feeling I'd had when I had held the telegram in my fingers returned now, pushing at my chest in a way I didn't understand. Why did his manner disturb me so? Light spilled from a downstairs window. I brushed aside my concern. Sheriff Jeffries probably didn't know the whole situation. He probably imagined my aunt's illness to be worse than it was. We motored past a low picket fence that closed in the house yard and stopped near the back gate. I lowered my throbbing foot to the ground and stood. The pain made me wince, but I could bear it. I held the sheriff's arm for support, and he led me to a door, the kitchen, I felt sure. We stepped inside the dark room, the smell of stale food hovering over the shadowy dishes that littered the kitchen table. This way, the sheriff hurried me along to the lit room across from the kitchen. 1,000 questions started and died on my lips before a tow-headed girl appeared. Her dirty dress hung limp. Her bare toes hugged the cold floor. I stepped back. A child? Tended my aunt? Ollie Elizabeth. Sheriff Jeffries put a hand on her head and tipped it back so he could see her face. This is Miss Ada's niece. She's come to help. The girl's large eyes turned in my direction, then looked back at the man she obviously knew. She pushed her unruly hair from her face before whimpering into the stillness. I told Miss Ada that Mr. Doc would come, and I'm sure he's doing his best to get here. Don't you worry. The serious-faced girl nodded. Then she tilted her head and eyed me once more. If you're going to stay, you can use my room. She tiptoed past us toward the dark staircase. The sheriff motioned for me to follow. For now, I saw no other choice. All right, I'll see you next Saturday for Chapter 5.